I think that people have been really hard on her as the vice president, that she didn't really get a fair shake.
I don't care for her at all, and so I think that we need someone else in there. If someone else was to get it, I would like for him to be a lot more moderate and not so far left.
Welcome back to America Decides. Voters in battleground states are sharing their thoughts, as you just heard, about Vice President Kamala Harris. But how do they feel about a likely matchup with former President Donald Trump? CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now. Anthony, what does a Trump-Harris matchup look like?
Hey there, Bob. Well, look, we got a little bit of a preview of this when we were polling about what was then a hypothetical matchup. And in that hypothetical matchup, when we did this going in the weekend, it was Harris down 3 points to Trump, but she wasn't down as much as Joe Biden was, right? But the biggest thing I want to watch going forward and show everybody is right after Biden stepped aside, we asked how this made you feel about motivation to vote. And there were these 4 in 10 Democrats who told us that they were more motivated to vote now. Now, why is that important? Because all throughout in the polling, we had been finding that Democrats were trailing Republicans on saying they were likely to vote. Some of them weren't as excited about Joe Biden, didn't like the matchup necessarily. This is a gap we're going to have to watch. Does it close? Does that motivation translate into Democrats saying they're going to turn out more? That'll affect the polling. Ultimately, it'll affect the election, but that's probably one of the pivotal things, Bob.
What else are you learning about the Biden coalition and how that could translate to Vice President Harris?
Okay. Couple of things. One is we're not going to necessarily be able to parse every single 1 or 2 point difference, but we do see when we compared the Harris versus Trump, Biden versus Trump, Harris is +3 better than Biden among black voters. Okay, so they would either both, but she would still have a ways to go to match the 2020 numbers, but better than Biden there. Okay, look at women voters, because this is going to be important. Look, we know the campaign, you've reported, they're going to raise women's issues. They're going to try to get women voters. They won them last time. Really comparable to Joe Biden, at least at the start. Did these numbers move? That's just a small sampling of the demographic numbers that we're going to have to watch. But those are a couple of key ones, somewhat comparable, a little bit better than Joe Biden, at least to start, Bob.
Anthony Salvanto, as ever, thank you for your analysis and for your polling. Let's bring in now our political panel, Molly Ball and Sabrina Rodriguez. Molly is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Sabrina is a national politics reporter for the Washington Post. Great to have both of you here. Sabrina, let's begin with you. You're on the road. What are you learning about Vice President Harris and her return to the campaign trail, this time as the likely nominee?
I mean, the first thing that we're seeing right now is a level of renewed energy and excitement around the election. How that plans out, and even just hearing, the segment now on polling. I mean, how we see that panning out with those key voters that Democrats need to turn out in the election in November, I think is still an open question. But for Democratic base voters, there is no question that this has sort of woken them up. We know so much about the double haters and the voters, the softening support that Biden had with voters of color and young voters. And we're definitely hearing from those voters. Right now, I'm in Indianapolis with Zeta Phi Beta's Grand Boulé that Kamala Harris will be speaking at tomorrow. And just talking to the Black women here, you hear this energy, this excitement, them tuning in, them really wanting to push. But these are the voters that we know we're going to turn out for Joe Biden as well. So again, I think it's a focus right now on, okay, what about those voters who were undecided before?
And Molly, what's your take as a reporter on all of that? You now have what's looking like a Trump-Harris race. How does that play out in the eyes of your sources, strategists in both parties?
Well, I think Sabrina really put her finger on it, which is that enthusiasm is not the same as percentages of votes, right? And so while she is clearly having this giant honeymoon with the Democratic base, and even Democrats who were the most hopeful about this switcheroo, who are pushing the hardest to get Joe Biden out of the race, have been surprised and impressed with, the level of fundraising. She's raised $100 million in the space of basically a day. That is something the party really needed. And we are seeing this level of energy among the base that has a lot of Democrats cautiously optimistic. But look, she still starts this race as essentially an underdog. She still has to define herself. While the Republican Party is racing to define her as a liberal, I thought the voter that we heard from, the Nevada voter earlier in the segment, was very interesting. She is perceived as more liberal than Biden in the context of a Democratic Party that most voters view as more liberal than they are, particularly those swing voters. So how does she position herself on policy? It's all fine to come out and say, I'm a prosecutor, I'm going to nail Donald Trump to the wall. She's got to say where she stands on policy and how she hopes to define herself on the ideological spectrum.
How do you expect her, Sabrina, to handle the attacks?
I mean, we've seen her try and shut them down as much as possible. And we saw, in her first rally today and being on the road, she's really trying to drive home that contrast with Donald Trump that we saw Biden really attempt to do in these months, but she can obviously do it more forcefully with that energy that she has and that boost that she has in these past couple of days. But I think the challenge is going to be, we already see Republicans, Donald Trump, JD Vance on the road last night, already slamming her as the borders are. And that's something that we've been hearing for months and months. I mean, that's not a new criticism launched at her, but she is going to have to maneuver, tackling that one in specific, because we know how much voters care about the issue of immigration and what they feel has been a failure from the Biden administration. So she really has to figure out how she's also going to navigate any kind of contrast she wants to draw between herself and President Joe Biden. And I think that is absolutely going to be key to her really getting those voters, is not just her trying to position herself as a moderate that can really appeal to swing voters, but also trying to say, I'm super supportive of the administration I work for, but here's how I might do some things differently, or here's where I think we could do better and needed to do better.
And Molly, it's not just going to be attacks on policy. I just spoke with DNC Chair Jamie Harrison about, we've already heard from House Republicans alluding to her race, her gender. Former President Trump is known for diminishing his opponents. Little Marco when it came to Senator Marco Rubio. Lying Ted when it came to Senator Ted Cruz. He's already attacked Vice President Harris's intelligence. What do you expect from the Trump campaign and from the former president? And how do you believe Democrats are going to handle that?
Well, Democrats certainly don't put anything past the Trump campaign. They expect them to sort of go into the gutter, as it were, particularly with these types of racial and gendered attacks. Of course, those types of attacks are something that Kamala Harris has dealt with her whole career, not to say her whole life. And I covered her 2020 primary campaign, which didn't go so well. But we did see her being willing to play the race card against Joe Biden in that famous interaction that they had in the debate.
Why, just to pause you for a moment, why didn't it go so well? As someone who covered that campaign, what was your assessment?
It's an interesting resonance with what she's going through now, because she could never define who she was as a candidate. She didn't try to be the tough on crime prosecutor in a full-throated way because she was too afraid of the left wing of the party, but she also didn't come out as a full-throated liberal candidate. We saw her take about 10 different positions on health care. And so I think, what Sabrina was talking about with immigration is going to be a fascinating test for her as a candidate, is she's going to have to come out and say where she stands on both this administration's immigration policy, which has gone, I think, so badly and been such a black mark for the Biden-Harris administration, but also what her vision would be going forward and how she would try to handle this very difficult issue if she were elected president, and the stands that she takes on issues like that. And again, I think we saw in 2020, the process of taking a stand was very tortured for her. She wasn't good at it. She doesn't have a very well-defined ideology. So I think that's going to determine a lot about the shape of her campaign.
And quickly, Sabrina, what are you hearing on the Veep stakes? I have to seem to ask everyone that today.
I mean, it's like the $1 million question, I feel. And it's been interesting even just talking to the women here in Indianapolis about who they're speculating it could be. I think something interesting from talking to the Black women voters at this convention has been them all in agreement that she should pick a white man, and that would be something that could potentially help her with that race question that is going to be, I mean, we know that Republicans are going to launch attacks tied to her race. So I think that's something that will definitely be front of mind. We're already seeing it in the conversation with Democratic operatives. But I think just one big thing for us to keep in mind is how unprecedented this timeline is. Like, she has to define herself. She has to define her vision for the future. She has to pick a VP. She has to officially secure the nomination. And she has to do all of that in under 4 months.
And there is always peril, as history shows us, with this compressed time period. 2 words: Tom Eagleton. Molly Ball and Sabrina Rodriguez, thank you.